Has this worked? Are we on? Are we on air? I never know. Hello, it is me, ZM. I look a mess. Let's not talk about it. I've got the frog. I've got the frog hot water bottle, and we're getting ready to read this week's text. It's just, and do you know what? I think I've reached a place in life where as long as I'm cozy, that is all that matters to me. I know I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, but we move. Oh, there's a person watching. This is meant to be unlisted. You're not meant to be here. 3, you're all here illegally. You're not meant to be watching this. Is this not unlisted? Okay, we forgot to unlist it. Hello to you, strangers. Hi, Ruby. Okay, we've got viewers. I didn't think that would happen. Okay. Well, this is nice, actually, because I prefer chatting to people rather than just talking to myself. But yes, we are going to read the Sunday text. It was a book by Daisy Hildyard, who is one of my favourite writers, actually. Fun fact, I started a series on the blog that, of course, I have not finished or done a second in the series for, but it was one of my top 5 favourite books, and Gab was like, you should do this because it's good clickbait. Number 1 is The Master and Margarita. Number 2 is Daisy Hildyard's second book, The Second Body. And this is her 3rd book, I believe. The first one was called Hunters in the Snow. That was a novel. The Second Body is non-fiction. And then this one, Emergency, is a novel. And it's billed as a dark pastoral for the climate change era. And yeah, thought I'd review it. It is out with Fitzcarraldo Editions, so it's got that little blue cover. Very Instagrammable. They're just so neat, tidy. But I'll read it and then I will chat a little bit through the notes that I didn't manage to tie up or make presentable for the actual formal review, which often happens because a text is only so big, and I've realised that it's nice to just kind of leave some things unsaid, I think. You don't have to tie up every loose end. Sometimes tying up every loose end and botching it kills the love or enjoyment you have for a thing. So I started leaving things out, or I don't know, leaving some things in drafts. And it's a nicer place to kind of give it a soft landing on these streams where I read. I just kind of chat through the things that I didn't manage to finish up. Okay, I can't actually see the comments. Oh my god, it's Gabrielle. Hello, Gabrielle. The actual text is blocking the comments. Maybe I'll move you. I don't want to do that thing where I do the stream and only look at myself, because 1, that's bad presentational skills, right? And 2, it's the messy bun and spot sticker combo for me. Right, let me finish my coffee though. How are you all? How's things? Can you type in the chat live? I think there might be a delay in the chat. I'm not sure, but let me know how it's going. How's your Friday? What you doing at the weekend? I'm writing, and I'm taking my sister somewhere. Yeah, slight delay in chat. How do I make that not a thing? Gab says she's having porridge all weekend. I'm used to reading these comments on Instagram. I don't need to read them on YouTube. These get saved, don't they? I don't know. Okay. hmm Okay, let's go. So, Review of Emergency by Daisy Hildyard, a novel, dark pastoral for the climate change era, published by Fitzcarraldo Editions. It came out, I think, a couple months ago, actually, so it's not even new. But it takes me a minute to read things. Yeah, like chill out. The emoji summary is the fox emoji, the world, and the squiggle. Like the little black squiggle, like the. Um, I think because just vibes. Um, okay. How much do you actually notice the world around you, either about it or in it? Like, actually, really notice. I think the world flies by me and I never really notice most of it. London is a rolling backdrop, capital city that just slips by in my periphery. I fall from my bedroom to the tube to the gym to the office to a. It's like I appear in these places by magic. When I'm in them, the space slips across my skin with a buttery smoothness. I do not notice the way nature interacts with the built environment. I do not notice the small beauty of the everyday. A little burp. I do not really see the world. I take it at face value. It is a stranger to me, but the city is full of strangers, so it is all quite seamless. There's almost no friction, except maybe when I fall too deep into my phone screen and I miss my stop. It's a rude awakening, isn't it? That mild panic of not immediately knowing where you are, the way you can feel your brain calibrating, orientating itself. It's okay, it's okay. I'm in the tunnel, halfway between Finsbury Park and Manor House. The heat climbs down away from my face, but it is only then, in that moment of panic, I notice the quality of the tunnel's darkness, the flickering light, the blank face of the person sat opposite, the smell and the spilled coffee stain sliding along the sticky lino floor. Daisy Hildyard's Emergency is a novel billed as a dark pastoral for the climate change era. An adult narrator is trapped alone in a London flat. There's a virus outside, so she cannot leave because the government says everyone must stay indoors. In this isolation, the adult narrator dissolves away, recollecting her childhood and the experience of growing up in 90s rural Yorkshire. The story is told across the weird transitional space between being a child and being a teenager, old enough to be outside and alone, but still looking at the world with curiosity and wonder. I think this is a novel about noticing things. I would struggle to tell you what happened in Emergency. There's a cheeky cow called Ivy, a family of foxes that die, I think. The first computer is delivered to the narrator's primary school classroom. A kestrel hunts a vole in a quarry. Actually, the quarry is quite important, but mostly nothing actually happens. A spider crawls out of a bag of bananas. Everyone at school loses their minds over vanilla body spray. The entire world shifts around the narrator, and she describes the turbulence of that shift. But that's exactly it. Nothing happened. It slips past. The entire world shifted, and nothing happened. No plot, only vibes, only slippage, only periphery. Why was this book not boring? By all means, it should have been. Absolutely nothing happens. Yet, I loved the experience of reading it. I fell through the pages, experiencing smooth, seamless, buttery slippage. And when I closed it at last, I realised that my hands were hot from the friction. The narrator does a lot of watching and noticing. Actually, the narrator does mostly nothing except perceive. She is a filter for everything as it hits us. The novel opens with a scene. Sitting above the quarry, the narrator watches as a panel of clay falls off the side of the surface. It reveals a cross section of a vole's burrow, nest, hole. Vole hole sounds silly. The narrator then notices a kestrel. The kestrel notices the vole. I guess the vole notices the kestrel too. I think the kestrel notices the narrator. They all stand still in this moment, aware of each other and waiting for someone to make the first move. The narrator becomes transparent, disappears into the act of watching. We veer off into a story about when the narrator's rabbit gave birth to a nest full of babies. Then Claire, the narrator's best friend. Then Soldier, next door's dog who was old and scary. The narrative falls through these spaces, never tripping and never snagging. It shifts seamlessly, smooth. It is fluid through change of season and change of era. But wait, the quarry is quite important. If I stretch my mind to really think about it, it has a main character presence, looming large over the village. It is a disruption of the idyllic pastoral scene, the perfect rolling hills and sweet little hedgerows of the British countryside. The quarry produces gravel that was sent all over the world. The requirements of Norwegian motorways and new cities in China determined the shape of the quarry and the size of the shape it left. It is proof of industry. It is proof that it's not just cities that network human civilization in an enormous global supply chain. The rural is global too. Oh my god. I really feel like I'm on my last legs and I don't know why. Just rough. Um, the rural is global too. More than just two. The global requires the rural as much as it requires the cosmopolitan. The rural just has a less glamorous role in this network. It is proof that there is no such thing as isolation, and the image of the British countryside is a sweet lie made up for the benefit of tourists and Tory MPs. It is proof that there is no real or meaningful difference between humans and environments, because humans leave stains, and these environments leak onto us in turn. I guess that's the dark pastoral, like the pastoral, a genre that deals with rural life in a sweet, tidy way. The rural as an image of serene simplicity, purity, or innocence, in comparison with the corruption and mess of the city. I suppose it's something deeply internalized within the culture, isn't it? The idea that nature is inherently healing, that human relationships with nature are innate, primal, deeply embedded, and yet uncomplicated. Because this cultural understanding is a bit of a shit dichotomy. It others nature. It doesn't account for people who don't make coherent sense in the countryside. Me. It paints a flattened image of both the urban and the rural, erases all the weird liminal spaces between those two harsh ends of the spectrum. And it is also just fundamentally unfucking true. The rural isn't inherently sweet or tidy. The corruption and mess of the city isn't something unique to urban life. All around the UK, there are rural areas that are deeply scarred by the big human hand of global capitalism. The quarry, the quarry. There is no such thing as isolation, no such thing as perfect serenity outside the mess of our corrupt system. I think that's the dark bit of dark pastoral. It complicates this easy story we pivot to, the return to nature. That might not be a happy cottagecore thing. It might be a gross rupture, dirt and mud and shit and the collapse of civilization and the inevitable embrace of the earth reclaiming us sooner than we all think. Back to the vole. I don't think we ever find out what actually happens to the vole and the kestrel, but I didn't find myself actually wanting to know. I think Daisy Hildyard is a trickster. I think the novel takes place on a different scale to the scale we are reading, word by word. In Daisy Hildyard's last book, The Second Body, the narrator references an essay by Timothy Clark. Clark's an academic, I think in the field of literary studies, who wrote about this thing called derangement of scale. Here, derangement takes on a meaning that's new to me. It describes a kind of disruption or a disturbance. Hildyard paraphrases Clarke, explaining derangement of scale as a sense of confusion that is caused by the huge gap between the immensity of the human's global existence and the smallness of your own private everyday life. It is most palpable when I think about climate change. Our tiny homes and even tinier bodies are bearing down on distant, huge, unknown things, and vice versa. For example, Clarke says, every affluent French person is already lurking in the living space of a farmer in the floodplains of Bangladesh. We exist in the world in these two ways, as part of humanity's global presence and as discrete individuals. The entire premise of the second body is an attempt to stitch together this duplicitous existence. The second body in question is the body that lurks across the expanse of Bangladesh's floodplains in rising tides, forest fires. Daisy Hildyard makes it less jarring by conjuring up the idea of a body. The second body is a kind of metaphor, but not really. It's also entirely real. Our second bodies exist, but they only exist on this wider, zoomed out scale. And that feels like a nice way to return to Timothy Clarke's Derangement of Scale. Describe the feeling when something doesn't match up to the scale you're trying to read it at. Timothy Clarke demonstrates his theory by referring to literal literature. Raymond Carver's short story, Elephant. He writes through the way understanding explodes out, that the story can come to be read in all these different ways on all these different scales. There's an interpersonal scale that takes what is presented to us at face value, the duration of the story itself. There's the cultural, historical scale that takes what is presented to us and sets it against the backdrop of the era, Reagan's America or whatever. And then there's the zoomed out scale, that of the whole earth and its inhabitants. This scale seems to jam the gears of the story, but also opens up strange new understandings. Loaded symbols that make sense on the cultural historical scale all of a sudden feel strange and alien. It's like it's been flipped inside out. The individual human starts to feel like a silly unit of measurement. Better to talk about societies or cultures, but talk about them in the way we would talk about individuals on that cultural historical scale. Do this for me. Think about humanity as a significant geological or historical force. Think about the human as a type of geological force. Let that sink in. Really consider it. Does it make your head hurt? Because, yeah, me too. It's because we all dissolve at that scale. We just cease. We can't be read as coherent. I think that's the scale emergency wants to be read at. Sharp tug. It feels like grit. It is speaking across scales between them, maybe. As I traipsed further and further in, I realised I was falling through the lines, missing the actual plot. The shift was happening and I wasn't quite seeing it. I was getting distracted by the foxes and the kestrels and the mundanity of the way the quarry fell into disuse, then got bought up by a Canadian company, then the men all got laid off, no more digger because everyone's gone to work on an oil rig. And there, did you see it? It was right there. It's not in the mundane drip of the everyday. It's in the wider shift. The entire world just shifted. I can't speak it aloud in my human words. My head hurts and my hands are hot with friction burn. I can only surrender, sliding down the walls of this thing. I cannot comprehend things in any other way, on any other scale beyond that of the discrete individual. I don't know why. Maybe it's neoliberalism or capitalism leaking into my brain like a groundwater swell. But it could also just be because I am a person and I rattle into a tailspin every time I try to define what a community is. Like, What does that mean? What do you mean? What's a community? Sharp tug as we slip between scales. I think that is why emergency is written in this way. I was deep in my phone screen, scrolling, and stopped on a Goodreads review of emergency that described it as heuristic, enabling someone to learn something for themselves. Sounds like a rigged process. Fuck around and find out, I guess. I think Daisy Hildyard is a trickster. Scale gets blown out. The world happens at full tilt. I am a lighter, loose in the washing machine, going round and round, beholden passenger. You are too. And it's funny, I didn't like or dislike this novel. I just enjoyed the experience of reading it, which is different because I enjoy experiencing things that I don't understand. I like the feeling of something taking place on a register just slightly above my understanding. Close enough that I know it's there, but out of reach enough for it to be incomprehensible. I love the word elide. It sounds slippery, like something is sliding past and you didn't even notice. All of a sudden, I am in the tunnel, halfway between Finsbury Park and Manor House. I'm noticing the quality of the tunnel's darkness. There isn't Wi-Fi in the tunnel, so I have to wait until the train reaches Manor House to 3D touch and press look up on the word heuristic. This is a novel about noticing things. And that's the end of the text. Okay. So I'm going to put my notes and I can maybe give you a bit of background, hashtag BTS content from the notebook and bits that didn't make it to the final text because I think that is nice. Like this is a softer landing place for them. Um, um, yeah, this is sorry. While I'm scrolling, I'm like totally not paying attention. I say that like there are loads of notes that didn't make the cut, but there's only like a little chunk. But I think it's worth. I'm still kind of thinking through this, but I think for me, I really struggled writing this text because I enjoyed it. I didn't understand why I enjoyed this book because nothing happened, and it took me ages to kind of piece things together and like follow the trail of my own thoughts, if that makes sense, and like figure out what it was I found compelling about this novel because it just kind of like happened to me. And I was like, oh, this was nice, but why? And it sounds maybe trite for me to say as a critic that like I didn't, the process of like discovering your own opinion is quite difficult sometimes because sometimes it's just like a body reaction and like your body just goes bing bong, yeah, I like that. And sometimes your body goes, yeah, I like that because it connects with the head, right? Sometimes it doesn't. It's just like your body just lights up and you're like, ooh, enjoy. And this was that. I had to kind of like follow my own reaction to it. And it took me a while for it to all click together. And it was only when I read, I like chased that reference about Timothy Clark and the Derangement of Scale from an older book from the second body, her second book, her last book before this one. That it was only reading Derangement of Scale that I realised that it was just kind of like that's why I liked it because there was something going on like a chronic level, just slightly above the actual plot itself, and it was kind of like folded in on top of the actual plot, and it was like just this weird kind of shape. There was like a shape or a scale. There's like something spatial going on, and it felt really clever and like an exercise, but not in like a kind of dull or dry or like strange way. it didn't feel like an exercise in a way that like maybe felt a bit arbitrary or like whatever. It felt like an exercise in a way that felt exciting. Um, and that's why I liked it. So hopefully that comes across in the text. 'Cause I feel like maybe the text can like hide its true opinion from itself, like in trying to make it all formal and like ready for public viewing. Sometimes the actual opinion itself kind of slips under the radar. But I'll read these notes. So the whole premise of the second body was that human life is not entirely private or discrete. The second body's existence makes manifest Timothy Clark's theory about the derangement of scale, the idea that by fact of existing in one way, you guarantee your presence is being felt elsewhere, somewhere where your body isn't. So I think the example that Timothy Clark uses, well, it was already mentioned in the text about, this is a quote from Derangement of Scale: to live the hourly trivia of an affluent lifestyle in France is already to lurk as a destructive interloper in the living space of a farmer on the massive floodplains of Bangladesh. And he also, within that essay, goes into one about Derrida. Yeah, he launches a criticism of Derrida's on hospitality. Nothing in his work seems to allow for a situation in which it is not irrational to connect a patio heater in London immediately with the slow inundation of Tuvalu in the Pacific. Because I think in Derrida's on hospitality, in that book or essay or whatever it actually is, I've not read it, but he kind of summarizes it in his essay, Timothy Clark, and he says something about how like Derrida notes all these ways in which the personal, the private is actually like within our homes. There are these public things that kind of like phones are like public, and they connect us to the public, so we can't have a private existence. I think that's what that is saying. And Clark is kind of like, well, it's not just like the intrusion of the public via the phone or like via the email. That seems silly because it's also every time you turn your kettle on, it's affecting, like, it's not just you that's being affected by you turning the kettle on. Like that tiny bit of electricity that you're using is um, connected to like a global system, and that's inherently public. And like you using the washing machine and putting things in the tumble dryer and like everything, even the existence of private property itself, like the idea that your home itself that's not private space. That is inherently public. It's just that's constructed in, not to flatten it into the social construct and like that feels like an easy get out clause, but like the existence of private property itself is like it's all network. You can't isolate yourself in that way because global capitalism. There is an inevitability in the second body. It is something that we have no individual agency in controlling. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. Well, not really. Again. But the second body complicates liberal notions of individual agency with regards to climate change. So, like, I'm going through this at the moment where I'm like, I haven't turned the heating on at home. One, because I don't have 3 grand spare just to like keep myself warm. Um, and it feels ridiculous to turn it on. Like I can't afford it. But the government, I was listening to this news podcast the other day about like how Liz Truss's government is like very hesitant to release public service information about the individual things we can do to ensure that our energy bills are not like crazy. So like one of the suggestions was turn down the temperature on like your flow whatever, your flow boiler. Like you can just like turn the temperature down so that the hot water isn't as hot and it's not heating it up as much. Because you don't need like boiling hot water straight to your tap. You can just like it mixes with the cold water. You can just turn it down. And it's like, well, hun, like if that's the extent of the help, that and like the what, 70 quid. If that's the extent of the help you've got for me this winter when it comes to energy bills, I don't know what to tell you. Like that's not enough. But it's this like liberal notion that like because even that public service announcement, like the trust government is quite. I think this podcast was saying like the trust government is quite hesitant to even put that out because the idea that like you know it's that liberal or neoliberal like that extremely free market libertarian idea that we shouldn't tell people what to do. People are in charge of themselves. They can like make their own decisions, and if they want to make their energy bills go down, they can like totally do the research. It's up to them. But if they want to spend more, that's their choice. And it's like, well, no, that's like the fundamental problem with libertarianism. Like the idea that you can do what you want just kind of doesn't really work when it faces collective problems like climate change. Um, but yeah, I think the end point of this note was that there's not really any kind of individual agency in this collective understanding, like whether it be like the second body, like that derangement on that scale of like the entirety of human history, where the human is a geological force, individual agency just kind of disappears. Oh my god, it's got a notification. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, on that scale of the human as the geological force, individual agency just kind of slips away. Doesn't really mean anything because the individual human isn't a significant unit of measurement. Like individual human just disappears into the soup of like human as geological force, right? Like we're talking about like societies and cultures as the individual unit. So like individual agency doesn't really touch society. You can put your kettle on or not. Um, and the note says, maybe if we don't have the can of Fanta, the orange ring pool won't end up in the gullet of a seabird, but the tides will still rise, the whales will still herd onto the beach, Tuvalu will still go under, etc., etc. Because within the book, there's like a bit about how the narrator notices the ring pull from an orange ring pull from a can of Fanta, like a special edition can of Fanta that she collected as a child, that she saved this ring pull. And she notices it like just on the road, like as litter, um, a couple of years later. And then as an adult, she recollects seeing this exact same kind of ring pull in like a seabird's autopsy that had been like strangled or like suffocated by the ring pull. And it's like these weird connections, like maybe that bird would have lived, maybe that's her ring pull. But I think that's the way that like the text kind of really fucks around with derangement of scale, right? Because that kind of seems like a neat line, like a neat way to draw a line between like individual action and like like the what is a really good example of this is I keep kind of getting YouTube notifications, or I used to keep getting YouTube algorithm recommendations for like these YouTubers that are very like obsessed or like not obsessed, but like very like at the extreme end of like taking care of their own climatological impact or like footprint. So they do this thing called zero waste, and they have these mason jars, right, or like clear glass jars where they put all the stuff that they're throwing away, like the plastic that they're throwing away. And the idea is you should be able to fit the plastic waste into the jar, like that zero waste. Um, and that's good for them because when I think about the amount of shit I throw away, it's just what I mean. Like every week the bins go out. Like it's there's a lot of stuff, and like it makes me feel generally terrible. I can have a keep cup all I like, but there's still a whole host of other shit. But that kind of like tight control over like individual consumption, it's not like that's not the scale that like climate change or like that collective human geological force. That's not the scale that rests on. Like we could disappear and like, or we could, simply be spirited off this earth, and that geological force would still happen. It's like a juggernaut that goes off without us. Um, and that's interesting, depressing, um, But I think the way that we talk about it doesn't quite encompass that nihilistic urge. Um, or like maybe the nihilistic urge is a way to like cop out of actually reckoning with like the scale of it. Um, by saying, "Oh, well, that's like really depressing." Maybe that's a cop out. Maybe it's like, but I don't. What I don't understand about this is that my brain cannot like. It's like that thing, right? What is a community? My brain can't like shift into that gear that like understands what a community is because capitalism, neoliberalism, like I think about things because I am an individual, I think about things on the scale of an individual. So like when you say community, I think collection of individuals. But that's just Maggie Thatcher, isn't it? Like that's just Margaret Thatcher saying there's no such thing as society. There are individuals and families. And it's like I think that's interesting and terrible because I can be as woke as I like. I can't really understand or comprehend things on that's derangement of scale, I think. Um, God, I hope that made sense. I hope that made sense. Please let me know, two people that are still watching, if that made sense. Um, is there anything more in that? No. We cannot control our second body in the same way we would control our first individual human body. And that, as a metaphor, it's not spiritualism. It's not like this like spirit body that kind of exists away from us. It's not like astral projecting or like some weird kind of hippy dippy nonsense. It's not like a shaman shadow. It's a manifestation of impact. So like the idea that like our impact um, can be collectively built, one, and that it has a presence that we do not have any kind of agency or like ability to control. That's interesting. That's a really interesting idea. Um, and I think that's partly why when I read the second body, it just like made my brain rattle around my head. Like it just kind of everything went pop. Like it just went blew my mind, like spun me. I think that's why it's my one of my favorite books because we just love things that shake up the way you understand the world. Um, I think the rest of the notes are kind of like ended up in the text, but that was something I didn't really manage to resolve, and I think maybe it's fine to have left my nattering about derangement of scale and like the individual, the collective, human as geological force. It's fine to have left it there, but I think sometimes I do wonder if I'm over explaining things and if I've alternatively explained things well enough because maybe an idea is new to me but not new to you and I'm like writing about this like that you know fairly intimately like it's like brand new or maybe also I'm taking you've got to be careful that you're not taking things for granted like things that you understand inside out might be new to a reader so never know quite how to strike that balance. I think I'm happy with where I left it in the text, but that is a further chit chat about what's about the slippage between public, private, and individual and collective, and global and local and scale, right? Because even just like zooming out to like the cultural historical scale, that feels more comfortable. We can like really understand that when we talk about like the social or political implications of like things that happen around us, we can understand them within you know I think I say this all the time, like, oh, well, there's been a decade of Tory governments. That that feels like, at least in the UK, that feels like the era we live in. Like it's part of like an interconnected, longer trail of time. Like a longer unit of measurement than just like a couple of days in my body as an individual, or like an individual day. Like the era of like conservative governance, like post New Labour, that's an era that's coherent. We can think about things within that. So when we talk about things like austerity or cuts to art spending, it maybe doesn't, you can't talk about that. You can talk about it in a granular sense on the scale of the everyday when it becomes gritty. But like, it makes much more sense to zoom out and kind of see that within the context of the social, historical, cultural scale. But yeah, thinking about things on that like human the entire history of like human existence. Boggles my mind. And I think it's an interesting way to think about things. And I think at the end of Timothy Clark's essay, talks very briefly says, actually, do you know what? Let me find it because it's an interesting. It made me laugh because I think it's kind of like it felt like it just felt like a nuts thing to say, but it does kind of like shake the entire understanding of like everything. Um, it made me laugh. He goes. A further conclusion seems clear. Thinking of climate change in relation to literary or cultural criticism will not be a matter of inventing some new method of reading per se, for its most prominent effect is of a derangement of scales. It is also an implosion of the intellectual competences. It is far easier for critics to stay inside the professionally familiar circle of cultural representations, ideals, and prejudices than to engage with long-term relations of physical cause and effect, or the environmental costs of an infrastructure, questions that involve non-human agency, and which engage modes of expertise that may lie outside the humanities as currently constituted. This would suggest that the humanities as currently constituted make up forms of ideological containment that now need to change. And that made me laugh because I was kind of like, yeah, say more then. Like, you got what kind of ending is that? But it just felt like a kind of like peace out, like, oh, by the way, this affects our entire field of study and we need to like completely recalibrate it. Bye. Um, it felt really funny. But yeah, I'll leave you with that thought because maybe it's that kind of thing, like you just kind of have to acknowledge that this like shapes your understanding of the world and how you exist in it and how you understand the other things that exist in the world. Um, mind-boggling. Bye. You know, there's nothing to say beyond that. I don't know. Well, let me know what you think. Not now. Let me know on the Instagram post when I actually will this end up on grid? I don't think it will. No, I don't think so. But maybe DM me if you think you have a thought about this, or leave it in the comments because YouTube has got comments. Leave it in the comments on the YouTube if you've got a thought about derangement of scale that I have not like brushed through. Because yeah, it's the second body's been my favorite book for a long time, and it's obviously just been kicking about up there. I still don't feel like I've resolved my thoughts about it, and I don't think I ever will. It will just constantly be a mind-boggling thing for me to comprehend, and we love that because we love things that we don't understand. So that's it. I've got to go have lunch and then go to an art fair. I'll see you later. Goodbye.